was their mansion slave for years. Then I bought their house at auction while they begged me to stop. They made me sleep in the basement while my stepsister got the master bedroom. I was 17 when my mother died, and they erased her from that house within a week. My stepmother looked at me like I was dirt, my father. He just looked away. 7 years. 7 years I cleaned their mansion, cooked their meals, scrubbed their toilets, while they lived like royalty. My stepsister wore designer clothes. I wore my mother's old shirts until they fell apart. They took my college fund, said I didn't deserve it, that I should be grateful they kept me at all. I smiled and said nothing. But I remembered everything, every insult, every slap, every time they made me feel invisible. And when their world started falling apart, I was ready. Because the girl they broke in that basement, she didn't stay broken. She got rich, she got powerful, and she came back. This is the story of how I bought their mansion. While they stood there and watched, this is my revenge. And it was perfect. They made me sleep in the basement. While my stepsister got the master bedroom. I was 17 when my mother died. And they erased her from that house within a week. My stepmother looked at me like I was dirt. My father, he just looked away. 7 years. 7 years I cleaned their mansion, cooked their meals, scrubbed their toilets, while they lived like royalty. My stepsister wore designer clothes. I wore my mother's old shirts until they fell apart. They took my college fund, said I didn't deserve it, that I should be grateful they kept me at all. I smiled and said nothing. But I remembered everything. Every insult, every slap, every time they made me feel invisible. And when their world started falling apart, I was ready. Because the girl they broke in that basement, she didn't stay broken. She got rich. She got powerful. And she came back. This is the story of how I bought their mansion. While they stood there and watched. This is my revenge. And it was perfect. 5 full 30-minute story script, first-person female POV. My name is Alina, and I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm not a villain. I'm not cruel. But what I did to my family, some people might call it heartless, some might call it justice, I call it survival. Let me take you back 7 years. I was 17 years old, and I just lost the only person who ever truly loved me, my mother. Cancer took her in 6 brutal months. I watched her fade away in that big house, the mansion my father had bought when he married her, the home that was supposed to be our fresh start after his first marriage ended. The funeral was on a Tuesday. By Friday, my stepmother Margaret had removed every trace of my mother from the house. Every photo, every piece of art she'd chosen, every throw pillow. Gone. I came home from school. Yes, they made me go back to school 3 days after burying my mother and found Margaret redecorating the living room. She'd hired an interior designer and was laughing, actually laughing, as they discussed fabric swatches. "Oh, Alina," she said when she noticed me standing there, my backpack still on my shoulders, staring at the empty wall where my mother's favorite painting used to hang. "Don't look so dramatic. Life goes on, sweetheart. Your father and I discussed it, and we both agreed this house needed a fresh start. Too many sad memories, you know." My mother had been dead for 72 hours. I should have known then what was coming, but I was 17, drowning in grief, and I still believed my father would protect me. He was my dad. He'd held me when I was born. He'd taught me to ride a bike. He'd told me I was his little girl. I was so stupid. That night at dinner, Margaret insisted we still have family dinners, even though the family was shattered. My father barely looked at me. He sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak, while Margaret chatted about her day and my stepsister Vanessa, who was 19, scrolled through her phone. "Alina," my father finally said, and my heart lifted because he was actually addressing me. "We need to discuss your situation." My situation, like I was a problem to be solved. "Your college fund," he continued, still not meeting my eyes. "Your mother and I had set aside money for your education. However, given the current circumstances, the funeral expenses, the medical bills, Margaret and I have decided that money needs to be redirected." I felt like I'd been punched. What? Vanessa is already in college, Margaret interjected smoothly. Her tuition is quite expensive, and with your mother's medical bills. She trailed off, making a sympathetic face that didn't reach her eyes. We simply can't afford to send 2 girls to university right now. You understand. But that's my money, I whispered. Mom set that up for me. She worked. Your mother, my father said, and his voice had an edge now, is dead, and I'm the executor of her estate. Legally, that money is mine to allocate as I see fit, and I see fit to ensure Vanessa finishes her education. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to rage and cry and demand justice. Instead, I said, okay, because I was 17 and terrified and alone. That was my first mistake, showing them I could be broken. The second mistake was thinking things couldn't get worse. They got so much worse. Within a month, Margaret had moved me from my bedroom, my childhood bedroom with the window seat my mother had installed, where she used to read to me, into the basement. Not even a finished basement. The laundry room area with a cot and a space heater. Vanessa needs a proper study space, Margaret explained, not explaining at all. And since you're not going to university, you don't need all that room, do you? My father stood behind her, silent. I carried my belongings down those stairs, my clothes, my books, my mother's jewelry box, and I cried so hard I thought I might vomit. The basement smelled like detergent and mildew. There was one tiny window at ground level where I could see people's feet walking by on the sidewalk. I was Cinderella, except there was no fairy godmother coming. That's when the chores started. If you're going to live here rent-free, Margaret said one morning, handing me a list, you'll need to contribute, just some light housekeeping. Light housekeeping turned out to be cleaning the entire 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom mansion, every day. Bathrooms, kitchen, floors, windows, dusting, vacuuming, laundry. Margaret would inspect my work, running her finger along baseboards, checking for streaks on windows. If I missed something, she'd make me do the entire room again. I was still in school, my senior year, so I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to clean before classes, then come home and clean more. Homework happened after 11 p.m. in the basement, with the washing machine rumbling next to my cot. My father never said a word. Not when Margaret, accidentally, threw out the last photo I had of my mother. Not when Vanessa started calling me, the help, in front of her friends. Not when I served dinner every night while they ate, then ate my own meal alone in the kitchen after cleaning up their plates. He just looked through me, like I was a ghost haunting his new perfect family. I graduated high school by some miracle. My grades were still good despite everything. My mother had raised me to value education, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me too. So what now? Margaret asked the day after graduation. You're 18, you could get a job, move out. But we both knew I had no money, no car, no support system. My mother had been an only child, and her parents were dead. My father's family lived across the country and had never been close to me. I was trapped. I'll get a job, I said. Save up. Wonderful, Margaret smiled. And until then, you'll continue to earn your keep here. In fact, since you'll have more time now, I'm expanding your duties. She wasn't kidding. I became their full-time maid. Cooking, cleaning, grocery shopping, running errands. Margaret even had me styling Vanessa's hair for her dates. I was up at dawn, in bed after midnight, every single day. And they paid me nothing. Room and board, Margaret said when I finally worked up the courage to ask about wages. That's your payment. Do you know how much it would cost to rent a room in this city? You're getting a bargain. A bargain. The basement with the cot and the mildew and the washer that shook so hard it woke me up at night. I lasted 3 years like that. 3 years of being invisible, being less than, being erased. I was 21 when everything changed. It started with a book. I found it at the public library where I'd go on my rare afternoons off. A book about financial independence, about investing, about building wealth from nothing. I read it in one sitting. hiding in the corner of the library until they closed. Something clicked in my brain. I couldn't save money from a job I didn't have, but I could educate myself, I could learn, I could prepare. So that's what I did. Every spare moment, I was learning. Online courses about finance, about real estate, about business. I used the library computers. I watched YouTube videos on my cracked phone. I read every book I could find about people who built empires from nothing. And slowly, carefully, I started applying for jobs. It wasn't easy. I had no degree, no experience beyond domestic work, which I couldn't even put on a resume because Margaret would have lost her mind if I'd asked for a reference. But I was smart, and I was desperate, and desperation makes you creative. I got a job as a night janitor at an office building downtown. Midnight to 6 a.m., minimum wage. It was perfect because Margaret never checked on me at night. She assumed I was in the basement sleeping. I told them I'd joined a gym and was going to early morning workout classes to explain why I left before dawn. Vanessa actually laughed at that. "You, working out, that's hilarious." I smiled and said nothing. The first paycheck made me cry. It wasn't much, $800 for 2 weeks of work, but it was mine. I opened a bank account at a branch across town where no one knew me. I didn't tell anyone. This was my secret. My escape fund. I worked that job for 8 months, saving every penny, before I got promoted to a day shift administrative role in the same building. Better pay, better hours. I told Margaret I'd gotten a job at a coffee shop. "Well, at least you'll be contributing," she sniffed. "I expect $500 a month for rent now that you're employed." I gave her $300 and told her that's all I could spare after taxes. She wasn't happy, but she took it. What she didn't know was that I was making $3,200 a month by then. The rest went into my secret account. I kept living in that basement, kept cleaning their mansion, kept being invisible. But at work, I was becoming someone else. I was good at my job, really good. I caught errors, streamlined processes, made myself indispensable. Within a year, I was promoted to office manager, then to operations coordinator. My salary doubled, then tripled. I was 23, and I had $80,000 in my secret account. At home, nothing had changed. I was still the servant, still the disappointment. Margaret had started bringing her friends over for wine afternoons, and she'd make me serve them, wearing an actual apron. "This is Alina," she'd say, like I was part of the furniture. "She helps around the house." Her friends would nod politely and forget I existed. One afternoon, I was refilling their wine glasses when I heard Margaret talking about my father's business. "Robert's company is struggling," she was saying quietly to her friend Linda. "The commercial real estate market is terrible right now. He's worried about foreclosure." My hand froze over the wine bottle. "The house," Linda gasped. "SHH, not so loud," Margaret hissed. "Yes, the house. He took out a second mortgage years ago for some investment that fell through, and now with the market crash, we might lose everything." I finished pouring and left the room, my heart pounding. They were going to lose the house. My mother's house. The house she'd loved, that she'd decorated, that held every memory I had of her. That night, I lay on my cot in the basement and stared at the ceiling. The washing machine hummed beside me. Upstairs, I could hear Vanessa's music playing, loud and cheerful. And I made a decision. If they were going to lose this house, it wasn't going to go to some random buyer. It was going to come to me. I started researching foreclosure processes, auction procedures, property law. I worked with a financial advisor, paid her with my saved money, to understand exactly what I'd need to make this happen. The house was worth $1.2 million. My father owed $800,000 on the mortgages. If it went to auction, it would likely sell for around the debt amount, maybe slightly more. I had $80,000. I needed at least $900,000 to win the auction and cover costs. So I worked harder. I took a second job consulting for a startup on the weekends. I invested in stocks, carefully, conservatively, watching them grow. I lived on nothing, spending maybe $50 a month on food for myself while I cooked elaborate meals for my family. At home, I watched the tension grow. My father started drinking more. Margaret's smile became brittle. They had whispered arguments late at night that I could hear through the basement vents. "We have to sell before it goes to foreclosure," my father pleaded one night. "No one's buying," Margaret snapped back. "The market is dead, Robert, we're trapped." I was 24 when the foreclosure notice was filed. I saw it in the public records. I'd been checking every week. They had 6 months. I had $340,000. Not enough. I went to a bank, dressed in my best suit, the one nice outfit I'd bought for work, and applied for a mortgage pre-approval. With my income, my credit score, and my down payment, they approved me for $650,000. Total, $990,000. It would be enough. I just had to wait. Those 6 months were the longest of my life. Every day I woke up in that basement, cleaned that house, and knew it would soon be mine. Every time Margaret snapped at me, every time Vanessa left her dishes for me to clean, every time my father looked through me like I didn't exist. I smiled and thought, soon. Margaret tried everything to save the house. She put it on the market, but the asking price was too high and she refused to lower it. She tried to refinance, but their credit was destroyed. She even tried to borrow money from her wealthy friends, but they all had excuses. I watched it all happen and said nothing. The auction was scheduled for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the county courthouse. I took the day off work, told my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically true. That morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. as usual. I cleaned the house as usual. I made breakfast as usual. My father sat at the table, his head in his hands. Margaret was on the phone, crying to someone, begging for money. Vanessa was still asleep. "Elena," my father said suddenly, looking at me for the first time in what felt like years. "I'm sorry." I paused while pouring his coffee. "For what?" "For all of this, for how things turned out your mother would have," he trailed off. "Yes," I said quietly, "she would have." I left the house at 9:30, told them I was going to work. Instead, I drove to the courthouse. The auction room was small and dingy, fluorescent lights, metal folding chairs, a podium at the front. There were maybe 15 people there. Property investors mostly, people looking for deals. And in the back row, I saw them. My father, Margaret, Vanessa. They hadn't seen me yet. Margaret was crying, mascara running down her face. My father looked 10 years older than he was. Vanessa was on her phone, looking bored and annoyed that she'd been dragged here. I sat in the front row. The auctioneer was a bored-looking man in his 50s. He rattled through the property details: address, square footage, condition. "Opening bid is $750,000, he announced. "Do I have $750,000? A man in the third row raised his hand. $750,000 to bidder 3. "Do I have $760,000? Another hand. $760,000 to bidder 7. "Do I have $770,000? I raised my hand. The auctioneer nodded. $770,000 to bidder 12. "Do I have $780,000? Behind me, I heard a gasp. Margaret had recognized me. $780,000 to bidder 3. "Do I have $790,000? I raised my hand again. "What is she doing here?" Margaret's voice rang out across the room. The auctioneer paused, annoyed. "Ma'am, this is a public auction. Please be quiet or I'll have you removed." $790,000 to bidder 12, he continued. "Do I have $800,000? Bidder 3 raised his hand. We went back and forth. $810,000, $820,000, $830,000. Behind me, I could hear Margaret sobbing. "Robert, do something. She can't possibly. Where would she even get the money?" At $860,000, bidder 3 dropped out. It was just me and bidder 7 now, a woman in a business suit who looked determined. $870,000. $880,000. $890,000. At $900,000, she hesitated. $900,000 to bidder 12, the auctioneer said. Do I have $910,000? The woman shook her head and sat down. $900,000 going once. Elena, my father's voice. I didn't turn around. Elena, please, that's our home, your home, you can't. $900,000 going twice. I'll have you arrested, Margaret screamed. You stole from us, you. Sold to bidder 12 for $900,000. The gavel came down. The room was silent, except for Margaret's crying. I stood up, walked to the clerk's desk, and handed over my cashier's check. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but my hands were steady. I signed the papers. The house was mine. I turned around. My father was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Margaret's face was red and blotchy, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Vanessa had finally looked up from her phone and was gaping. I walked down the aisle toward them. Elena, my father whispered, how did you? I stopped in front of them. I've been working for 6 years, I said calmly. While I lived in your basement and cleaned your toilets and cooked your meals, I was working, saving, investing, building a life you knew nothing about because you never asked, because you never cared. You ungrateful, Margaret started. I'm not done, I cut her off, and something in my voice made her mouth snap shut. You took my mother's house, her memory, her legacy, and you erased it. You erased her. You tried to erase me. You treated me like a servant, like property, like nothing. My voice was shaking now, but I kept going. I could have left years ago. I had the money, but I stayed because I wanted this. I wanted to watch you lose everything the way you made me lose everything. I wanted to stand in that auction room and take back what you stole from me. We gave you a home, my father said weakly. You gave me a basement and a cot and 7 years of abuse, I replied. And now I'm giving you 30 days to get out of my house. Margaret let out a sound like a wounded animal. Vanessa found her voice. You're a psycho. You're actually insane. I looked at her, my stepsister who'd had everything handed to her, who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd called me the help for 7 years. No, I said. I'm just someone who learned that family isn't who you're born to. It's who earns the right to be in your life. And you 3 lost that right a long time ago. I walked out of that courthouse with the deed to the house in my bag. Behind me, I could hear Margaret screaming. I didn't look back. The next 30 days were interesting. They tried everything. My father called me repeatedly. I'd blocked his number after the auction, but he left voicemails, apologizing, begging, explaining how they couldn't afford to move, didn't have anywhere to go. Margaret tried to get lawyers involved, claiming I'd somehow defrauded them. The lawyers took one look at the case and told her there was nothing illegal about buying a house at a public auction. Vanessa posted about me on social media, calling me evil, cruel, heartless. Her friends rallied around her, posting supportive comments about how awful I was. I didn't care. I showed up at the house on day 15 with a moving company and a locksmith. Margaret answered the door. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in weeks. What are you doing? She asked. I'm moving in, I said simply. This is my house. I'm giving you 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live per the eviction notice I had served. Today, I'm moving my belongings into the master bedroom. Her face went white. You can't. I can, and I am. I walked past her, and the movers followed with my things. Not that I had much. A few boxes of clothes, books, my mother's jewelry box that I'd kept hidden all these years. I walked up the stairs, not the basement stairs, the main staircase with the crystal chandelier, and into the master bedroom. My mother's room. They'd redecorated it, of course, but it was still the same space. The same windows she'd looked out of, the same floor she'd walked on. I stood in the center of the room and cried. The movers left everything and quietly excused themselves. I sat on the floor of that empty room. They'd taken the bed already, moving it to wherever they were going, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Grief for my mother, rage at my father, triumph at my victory, and underneath it all, a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this. I stayed there for an hour. Then I dried my eyes, stood up, and got to work. I hired the same interior designer Margaret had used 7 years ago, the one who'd helped erase my mother. I told her I wanted the house restored to exactly how it looked when my mother was alive. I have photos, I said, pulling out my phone. I'd kept every picture backed up in 3 different places, even though looking at them hurt. The designer looked at the photos and then at me, recognition dawning. You're Robert's daughter, the one who... Yes, I said. Can you do it? She could. It took 2 months and most of my remaining savings, but when she was done, the house looked like my mother had never left. The painting she loved was back on the wall. I'd tracked down the buyer and paid triple what they'd paid Margaret for it. The throw pillows, the curtains, the furniture, all replaced with identical or near-identical pieces. In my old bedroom, I had my mother's window seat rebuilt exactly as it had been. And in the living room, I hung a portrait of her, a beautiful professional photo from before she got sick, where she was smiling and looked happy and alive. I stood in front of that portrait the day the designer finished, and I whispered, I got it back, Mom. I got your house back. I like to think she heard me. My father tried to visit once, about 3 months after they moved out. I'd heard through the grapevine, a former neighbor who'd always been kind to me, that they were living in a small apartment across town. Margaret had gotten a job at a retail store. Vanessa had dropped out of college because they couldn't afford tuition. My father was working 2 jobs. Part of me felt guilty. A very small part. He rang the doorbell, his former doorbell, and I answered. He looked so old, so broken. Elena, he said, can we talk? No, I said. Please, I just want to explain. Explain what? I asked. Explain how you let your wife erase your first wife's memory. Explain how you let them turn your daughter into a servant. Explain how you looked through me for 7 years like I was nothing. I was weak, he said, and he was crying. I was weak and I was grieving and I made terrible choices, but you're my daughter, you're my little girl. No, I said quietly. I was your little girl. That girl died in the basement while you ate dinner upstairs and pretended she didn't exist. You don't get to claim her now. What do you want from me? He asked. What can I do to make this right? I thought about it, really thought about it. Nothing, I finally said. There's nothing you can do. The time for making it right was 7 years ago. It was 6 years ago. It was 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year ago. It was every single day you watched them abuse me and said nothing. That time is gone. You can't buy it back and I can't forgive it. So that's it, he asked. I just lose my daughter. You lost your daughter a long time ago, I said. You're just noticing now. I closed the door. He stood on the porch for a long time. I watched through the window as he cried, as he finally walked away. And I felt nothing. Maybe that makes me cold. Maybe it makes me heartless. But I'd learned something in those 7 years in the basement, something important. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And I was done burning. That was 2 years ago. Today, I'm 26. I still live in the house, my house. I've turned my mother's old office into my own home office. I left my corporate job and started my own consulting firm, and I'm making more money than I ever dreamed of. I hired a housekeeper, a lovely woman named Maria, who I pay extremely well and treat with respect. I've made friends, real friends who don't know my history, who just know me as Alina, the successful consultant with the beautiful house. I've been in therapy for a year, working through the trauma, the anger, the guilt. And I've started dating someone, a kind man who thinks I'm amazing and tells me so every day. Life is good. But sometimes, late at night, I walk through this house and remember. I remember being 17 and lost. I remember being 20 and hopeless. I remember being 24 and dangerous. And I wonder if my mother would be proud or horrified by what I became. I think she'd be proud. I think she'd understand that sometimes survival looks like revenge. I think she'd hug me and tell me I did what I had to do. At least I hope she would. Because here's the truth that I've learned, the truth that I carry with me every day. Nice girls don't survive. Nice girls get erased, get forgotten, get used up and thrown away. My mother was nice. She was kind and generous and loving. And they erased her before her body was even cold. I wasn't going to let them erase me too. So I became something else, something harder, something that could survive in their world and come out on top. Was it revenge? Yes. Was it justified? I believe so. Would I do it again, in a heartbeat? Because at the end of the day, I'm not living in a basement anymore. I'm not scrubbing anyone's toilets. I'm not invisible. I'm Alina, and this is my house in my name, bought with my money, filled with my mother's memory. And every morning when I wake up in the master bedroom, in the bed I chose, looking out the windows my mother loved, I think, I won. They tried to break me. They tried to erase me. They failed. I won. And that, more than anything else, makes all of it worth it. The last time I saw any of them was 6 months ago. I was at a restaurant downtown, a nice place, the kind I can afford now without thinking about it. I was with my boyfriend, celebrating his promotion, laughing over wine and pasta. And I saw them walk in. All three of them, my father, Margaret, Vanessa. They looked ordinary, tired, middle-aged people in regular clothes coming in for a regular dinner. They didn't see me at first. The hostess sat them across the restaurant. But then Vanessa looked up and our eyes met. I saw her say something to Margaret. Margaret's head whipped around. Then my father turned. They all stared at me. I could have looked away, could have pretended I didn't see them. Instead, I raised my wine glass slightly, just a small gesture, and smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile. Just a smile that said, I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm thriving. And you can't touch me anymore. My father looked away first, then Margaret. Vanessa stared a moment longer, then turned back to her menu. My boyfriend asked, Do you know them? No, I said. I used to, but not anymore. And it was true. Those people, the father who abandoned me, the stepmother who abused me, the stepsister who mocked me, they were strangers now. The family that mattered, the family I was building, was right in front of me. Everything else was just the past. I finished my wine, and we ordered dessert, and I didn't look at them again. Because that's the final revenge, isn't it? Not making them suffer. Not making them pay. But moving on so completely, so thoroughly, that they become irrelevant. That they become nothing. The way they tried to make me nothing. I won't lie and say I never think about them. I do. Late at night sometimes I wonder if they're okay, if they've learned anything, if they ever think about me and feel regret. But mostly, I think about my mother. I think about how proud she'd be of the woman I became. Not because I took revenge, though maybe she'd understand that too. But because I survived. Because I refused to let them define me. Because I built a life from nothing, in the same way she'd built a life for us after my father's first marriage ended. She was strong, I'm strong too. And this house, this beautiful house filled with her memory, is proof of that strength. Sometimes people ask me, the few friends who know my story, if I regret it. If I wish I'd just walked away instead of buying the house, instead of forcing them to watch me take back what was mine. I tell them the truth. No. Not for a second. Because walking away would have meant they won. Walking away would have meant accepting that I deserved what they did to me. Walking away would have meant that 7 years of abuse and erasure and pain were just something to get over, something to forgive and forget. But I don't believe in forgiveness without accountability. And they never once took accountability. Even at the auction, even when they were losing everything, it was all excuses and blame and, how could you do this to us? Never, we're sorry for what we did to you. Never, we were wrong. Never, you deserved better. So no, I don't regret it. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that they made me into someone who could do something like that. But the act itself, the revenge, that I'd do again in a heartbeat. Because here's what they didn't understand, what they never understood. When you treat someone like they're worthless for long enough, one of two things happens. Either they believe you and they break, or they prove you wrong and you break. They gambled that I'd be the first kind of person. They lost. And now I'm here, in this house, living the life they tried to steal from me. And they're out there, living the life they earned with their cruelty. That's not revenge. That's justice. So to anyone listening to this story, anyone who's been made to feel small or worthless or invisible by the people who were supposed to love them, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You don't have to forgive people who aren't sorry. You don't have to be nice to people who were never nice to you. You can survive. You can thrive. You can win. And when you do, when you're standing in the metaphorical mansion that you bought with your own money and your own strength, and they're standing outside wondering what happened, you can smile. Because you earned that smile. Every single day. I'm Alina. This is my house. This is my life. This is my story. And it has a happy ending after all. Just not the one they wanted. The one I made. Myself.